Hey guys, tonight we slip into a world that's dimly lit by flickering tallow candles where narrow cobblestone alleys smell faintly of damp stone beer and the sweet spiced perfume of someone you probably shouldn't trust. You're in a medieval town, maybe Bruges, maybe London, maybe Lübeck. The streets twist like a riddle you'll never quite solve, and somewhere behind a crooked wooden door, there's a place you've been warned about and invited to in the same breath. Inside, voices hum low fabrics brush against skin, and every glance carries a negotiation. You probably won't survive this, at least not without losing something you didn't mean to give away. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, if you're still awake enough, let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is right now. I read every single one. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. It's late in the 14th century. You've just stepped off a muddy street into the cramped vestibule of a brothel. They don't call it that here, not openly. In London, they might say stews, borrowing from the public bathhouses that often served as polite cover for this trade. In Paris, it might be a maison close, though that phrase will only really take hold later. In German towns, it could be a Frauenhaus, literally a women's house. But whatever the euphemism, the air inside is unmistakable, heavy with heat smoke from the hearth, and the warm musk of too many bodies pressed close in too small a space. The woman who greets you isn't who you expect. She's not the delicate, tragic heroine of a troubadour's song. She's middle-aged, broad-shouldered, and dressed in a gown that might have been expensive 10 years ago. Her hair is bound under a linen coif, a few strands of iron gray escaping. She eyes you the way a merchant eyes a bale of cloth, assessing quality, deciding your worth before you even speak. This is the abbess, not a nun, but the madam. And in this place, her authority is absolute. You feel the floorboards creak as you follow her inside. The building is taller than it looks from the street, with narrow staircases and crooked door frames that lean as if they're tired of centuries of whispers. On the ground floor, there's a public room, benches around long tables, a smoky fire in a stone hearth, a pair of dice clattering on the table in the corner. Two men argue over ale. They're not ashamed to be here. In fact, they look like they belong. Brothels in many medieval towns were semi-legal, regulated by city authorities who preferred to keep such things contained. It might surprise you to learn that many of these houses were licensed, sometimes even owned by the town itself. In cities like Nuremberg or Frankfurt, municipal brothels were part of the civic economy. Officials argued that by concentrating sex work in one place, they could protect honest women from harassment in the streets, curb venereal disease, and keep soldiers and apprentices out of trouble. Of course, the moral arguments were a little more flexible. The church officially condemned prostitution, but its clergy often tolerated it as a necessary evil. Better that men visit a brothel, they said, than seduce respectable wives or daughters. The abbess offers you wine. It's not good wine, it's thin, sour, and smells faintly of pitch from the cask, but it warms you. Wine in a brothel is less about pleasure and more about loosening the tongue and the purse strings. You notice the coins on the table, small silver groschen, a few copper pennies. Prices vary wildly depending on the town, the woman, the service. In some places, a visit might cost the equivalent of a day's wage for a craftsman. In others, especially if you're just an apprentice or a sailor, you might bargain for less. From the public room, you can hear footsteps on the stairs above. The upper floors are divided into small chambers, some barely large enough for a bed and a stool. The walls are thin. Privacy here is an illusion. Many of the women don't live in the brothel full-time. Some rent their room by the week, others only come in on busy market days or festivals. A few are bound to the house by debt, unable to leave until they've paid what they owe for clothes, food, or protection. There's laughter from behind a half-closed door. It's not the airy giggle of a courtly lady. It's rough knowing edged with something you can't quite place. You remember that life here isn't a romance. Medieval brothels were workplaces, and work meant routine. Women might see half a dozen clients in an evening, more during a fair or a tournament. Some clients came for conversation, as much as for sex, craving a place where they could drink, talk, and be flattered without their wives or guildmasters watching. The abbess points out a narrow staircase to the rear, leading down instead of up. Curiosity pulls you toward it. The cellar is cool and smells of damp stone, but it's also where the beer is stored, along with barrels of pickled herring and sacks of rye bread for the women and guests. Sometimes the cellar doubles as a private room for clients who can't or won't climb the stairs. You've heard that in some brothels it's also a place where rules are enforced, debts are settled, and punishments are delivered quietly out of earshot of the public room. As you make your way back upstairs, you realize that the brothel is a small but complex ecosystem. There are the women, of course, but also servants who haul water from the public well, launder the linen, and keep the fire going. There are guards or bouncers, often off-duty soldiers or men with a taste for violence who make sure no one leaves without paying, and no one enters without permission. And above them all is the abbess, whose job is part businesswoman, part peacekeeper, part enforcer. The city's hand is never far away. Officials might visit once a week to collect taxes or licensing fees. In London, Southwark stews were technically under the jurisdiction of the Bishop of Winchester, which is why prostitutes there were nicknamed Winchester geese. A brothel that didn't pay its dues might find itself shuttered, its women driven into the streets where they were far more vulnerable to arrest or worse. You notice now that the women are dressed more plainly than the courtesans you've seen in paintings. Regulations in many cities forbade prostitutes from wearing fine fabrics, gold jewelry, or extravagant veils, in part to keep them from being mistaken for respectable wives. In some places, they were even required to wear distinctive clothing, red hoods and Florence-striped cloaks in Vienna, marking them as women of the trade. This served both as advertisement and as a warning. As the evening deepens, the brothel fills. A pair of traveling merchants clink cups with a group of local apprentices. The air grows hotter, the noise louder. Somewhere a lute begins to play a tune you half recognize, the kind of melody that's been passed from tavern to tavern for generations. You're aware now that for all its moral compromises, the brothel is also a space of surprising openness. Here, strangers talk across class lines. Gossip flows freely, and news from far-off cities arrives faster than the official messengers. A woman in a simple blue gown passes by, touching your arm lightly. Her smile is quick, businesslike. She's not selling a dream of romance, she's offering a transaction, and she expects you to understand that. Outside, the watch bells mark the hour. Inside, the night is just beginning. You linger at the edge of the public room, letting your eyes adjust to the play of firelight and shadow. The lute melody drifts into the low hum of conversation, and you find yourself drawn toward the table where the merchants sit. One of them, a ruddy-cheeked man with a thick beard, is gesturing animatedly, telling a story that seems to involve a shipwreck, a dishonest port official, and a barrel of salted fish. His companion laughs so hard, his cup spills, and a serving girl appears instantly to mop the ale from the table with a frayed linen rag. She doesn't linger, her job is to keep the cups full, the tables clean, and the atmosphere just this side of chaotic. The abbess watches from her place near the hearth. She's not hovering exactly, but her gaze moves constantly, noting who's spending freely, who's loitering without ordering, and which of her women have disappeared upstairs for too long. This is her kingdom, and she governs it with the calm authority of someone who's seen every possible problem unfold within these timbered walls. She'll step in if tempers flare, if a drunk grows too loud, or if someone tries to slip away without settling their bill. But mostly, she lets the place run on its own rhythm, a rhythm she's cultivated over years. The women come and go through the common room, like actors slipping in and out of a stage set. You begin to notice patterns. The younger ones tend to linger near the entrance, greeting new arrivals with smiles, or a teasing word, while the older, more experienced women sit with established patrons playing cards or dice trading gossip, and letting the conversation drift toward more profitable arrangements. It's a dance, but one without a fixed choreography. Each performer improvises based on her read of the audience. Your attention is caught by a cluster of 3 women seated near the far wall. One wears a red kerchief tied tightly over her hair. Another has a plain wool gown, but wears a necklace of cheap glass beads that catch the light. And the third sits slightly apart, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. She watches the room with a detached air, sipping from her cup. Perhaps she's new to the house, or perhaps she's simply not in the mood to work tonight. In a brothel, moods matter. Not every evening is lucrative, and not every client is worth the effort. It's here you start to understand the economics that pulse beneath the surface. Every woman here pays a portion of her earnings to the abbess, sometimes a flat fee for the room, sometimes a percentage of each transaction. On top of that are the costs for food, drink, clothing, and sometimes even the candles in the upstairs rooms. In certain towns, the city itself takes a cut through licensing fees or special taxes, ensuring that even vice contributes to the civic coffers. What's left over is the woman's own, though debts to the house or to moneylenders can drain it away before she ever sees it. From the far side of the room comes a burst of laughter. A group of journeymen have just been joined by a woman with hair like spilled copper, her gown laced low over her chest. She slides into their bench with practiced ease, filling the space with her voice and her presence. The men lean toward her, captivated. You can tell this isn't her first night working a crowd. She knows how to keep the conversation light, flirtatious, but not so intimate that it excludes the others. In a place like this, one skilled woman can turn a table of reluctant drinkers into paying clients before the night is over. The abbess catches your eye and gestures toward the stairs. You hesitate, descending earlier had taken you into the damp and the dark, but now she's indicating the way up toward the more private spaces of the house. She doesn't accompany you. Instead, a younger woman with dark eyes and a wry smile takes your arm and leads you toward the narrow steps. Her name is Kathy, or at least that's what she tells you. Whether it's her real name or one she uses for work doesn't matter, since she's told that same name to 100 strangers and worn each interaction like a cloak she can shed when she's done. The staircase bends sharply, the steps creaking underfoot. At the landing, a single candle burns in an iron sconce, casting long shadows along the uneven plastered walls. Kathy opens a door into a small chamber. The bed is little more than a wooden frame with a straw mattress covered by a faded quilt. A single stool sits in the corner beside a low chest. There's a chipped basin on a stand filled with water that's already gone tepid. You realize quickly that this room is for utility, not romance. It's clean enough, but the air carries the scent of wood smoke and the faint, unmistakable tang of bodies. In some cities, you've heard these rooms were inspected by officials to ensure they met basic standards of cleanliness. Not out of charity, disease was a constant fear, and outbreaks of the great pox or other afflictions could devastate not only the brothel, but the wider community. In regulated houses, women might be required to undergo regular health checks, though the accuracy and fairness of these examinations were questionable. The city wanted the trade to continue, but without sparking panic or moral outrage. Kathy closes the door and leans against it, watching you with that same faint smile. She talks for a while, not about herself, but about the weather, the market prices for grain, the news from the port. This is another part of the transaction conversation, as both a lure and a screen. Many clients wanted to believe they were more than just customers, that they were being chosen, even courted. Skilled women knew how to feed that illusion without letting it consume their time. You think about the double lives these women lead. Some have families elsewhere, a mother or a child they send money to when they can. Others drift from town to town, following fairs, pilgrimages, or military campaigns, setting up wherever the demand is high. A few stay in one place for years, becoming fixtures of the local scene. And for all of them, the brothel is both a workplace and a shield. Outside its walls, they are more vulnerable to harassment, assault, or arrest. Inside, they operate within a set of rules that may be harsh, but at least are predictable. From outside the window, you hear the sound of boots on cobblestones, the distant clang of the watchman's bell marking the hour. Night in a medieval town is a dangerous time, full of shadows and the occasional shout. The brothel, for all its vices, is brightly lit compared to the streets, its door a beacon for those who crave warmth, company, or simply a place to drink without judgment. Kathy rises and moves toward the door, signaling the end of your visit upstairs. She doesn't rush you, but you can tell she has other clients to see, other conversations to steer. As you follow her back down, you pass another woman leading a man upward, her hand resting lightly on his sleeve. The rhythm continues, one pair descending, another ascending, the steady heartbeat of the house. Back in the common room, the noise has swelled. The merchants are arguing now good-naturedly, but loudly, over whose hometown beer is superior. The abbess has moved to the bar, speaking quietly with the bouncer, her expression unreadable. The serving girl from earlier sweeps past you, carrying a tray of fresh mugs, deftly avoiding a stumbling apprentice, whose friends are egging him on to sing. You realize you could spend the entire night here without exhausting the layers of the place. There are the obvious transactions, yes, but also the subtle networks of loyalty, rivalry, and survival that bind the people inside. The brothel is not simply a den of pleasure or sin. It's a microcosm of the medieval town itself, condensed into a handful of rooms, where power, money, and desire mingle inextricably. You settle back into a corner bench, now cupping what might be your second or third mug of ale, lukewarm, bitter, but strangely comforting. Around you, the brothel pulses with sound and movement, a living rhythm that never quite stops. It's no longer early evening. Time has slipped unmeasured into the darker hours. Candles have burned low and been replaced, their wax pooling in crude metal holders. The hearth fire is being stoked again by a tired servant with soot-smudged hands. There's a woman seated alone at the next table, slightly older than most you've seen here tonight. Her gown is modest, her eyes sharp. You don't realize at first that she's not part of the house. She's an independent. In many towns, women who didn't work under the roof or rules of an official brothel could still ply their trade in rented rooms, taverns, or the alleys beyond the city walls. But it was risky. Without the protection of an abbess or house guards, they relied on bribes to constables or the goodwill of clients. Some worked in brothels by day and alone at night, blurring lines to earn a few more coins. In some places, independent women were called clapoirs, or carouses, terms that changed from town to town, but always carried the same implication: outsiders, unregulated, and sometimes hunted. Local authorities might tolerate them during feast days or seasonal fairs when visitors flooded the city and demand spiked. But during quiet months, these women could be rounded up, fined, or expelled. There were even laws in places like Bruges that punished anyone caught harboring them: tavern owners, landladies, or sympathetic neighbors. Your attention drifts as you recall a case from Ghent decades ago, where the city council debated whether to grant protection to a woman who'd been operating outside the brothel quarter. She claimed she'd been assaulted by a client. The council sided with the man. She wasn't registered, they said. She had no right to work, therefore no right to complain. It's a quiet truth that lingers through this world. Legality offers a sliver of protection, but never justice. The abbess makes her rounds again, slower now. She's checking ledgers. You hadn't noticed the notebook earlier tucked beneath her cloak, its pages thick with waxy ink. Names, fees, debts. Every woman here owes something either to her or to the house, and she in turn owes the city. Taxes, bribes, informal gifts to the guard captains. It's a hierarchy built on silent transactions. There are nights when more coin leaves her pocket than enters it. Nights when fights break out, or someone steals, or a city inspector arrives early and unsmiling. That thought reminds you brothels weren't just places for anonymous encounters. They were watched, monitored, and at times exploited by those in power. In Avignon, during the papal residency, church officials openly taxed and visited brothels. In Florence, records show that city officials rented public houses for sex workers, maintaining them under the guise of civic hygiene. They didn't visit out of curiosity. They came for order. And yet within these walls, a different kind of power plays out. A woman enters the room, now tall, with skin the color of chestnut bark, and eyes like polished garnet. Heads turn. Her name is Marian, or maybe that's only her working name. She came from somewhere else, perhaps Moorish Spain, perhaps the ports of Marseille or Palermo. Her presence is magnetic, and not just for her beauty. You see it in the way the other women glance at her, some with admiration, others with calculation. She's successful. She earns. There's an unspoken ladder here. Some women specialize role-play fetishes, exotic tales whispered in half a dozen languages. Some build up regular clientele and earn better food cleaner rooms, more favorable terms. A few even dream of buying their way out. But success brings attention, and attention brings risk. Jealousy sabotages the cold bureaucracy of a guild that suddenly rewrites its rules. In cities like Prague and Milan, guilds of prostitutes actually existed. They had codes, fines, councils. You could be expelled for cheating a client or for helping another woman escape her debts. A commotion near the door interrupts your thoughts. A man stumbles in shouting blood on his tunic. His friend holds him upright, laughing too loudly. The abbess is on her feet in seconds, already gesturing to the guard. The room stills. Everyone watches. This is how it starts. Sometimes drunk men blades, flashing too many egos in too small a space. But the guard is fast and calm. He speaks low, hand on his cudgel. The shouting man quiets, sways, nods. He'll be allowed to stay for now, but only if he pays first and doesn't cause more trouble. As the tension diffuses, you notice something subtle. The women haven't reacted in fear. They've seen this before. More than once. They know how to read a room, how to vanish when danger brews. That awareness becomes muscle memory. For some, it becomes armor. And yet the bruises still happen. A crooked finger, a broken rib, a split lip explained away as a stumble on the stairs. These things are rarely spoken aloud. You remember stories from Cologne where sex workers kept secret ledgers of clients who'd been violent, not to report them, but to warn others. There were even brothels that issued small tokens to their best customers marked with symbols or initials. A kind of perverse loyalty card, but also a way to ensure the man could be traced if something went wrong. Discretion was sacred, but silence wasn't always safe. The room feels warmer now. The hearth is blazing, and the mingled scents of sweat wool, roast onions, and spilled ale have become background noise. Someone opens the shutters slightly to let in cool night air. The breeze carries the faint scent of horses and smoke, the clatter of distant hooves on stone. Somewhere nearby, a church bell tolls the hour again, its chime soft but steady, indifferent to what goes on behind closed doors. Kathy passes by you again, this time slower. Her hair is coming loose from its braid, a flush rising to her cheeks. She's done with her last client. She doesn't smile this time, just gives you a nod before slipping behind the bar for water. You wonder if she'll sleep here tonight, or return to a rented room somewhere else in town. Some of the women keep small lodgings nearby. Others sleep in the brothel when work runs late. The house offers meals and sometimes even a bath, but the latter costs extra and hot water even more. There's a tub in the back, you've heard. A copper one just big enough for a single person to sit knees to chest. On festival days, the brothel might offer a special drink bath and companionship bundled into one price. Men came in droves on Saints' Day or after a long sea voyage. Soldiers, too, especially after returning from campaign. The house would smell of soap and steam and wild herbs mixed into the water to cover the scent of old copper. But tonight is an ordinary night. No feasts, no banners strung through the alleys. Just the slow burn of routine. The abbess returns to her seat, reopens her ledger, and dips her quill. Someone sings softly in the far corner, a lullaby, oddly enough. A woman braids another's hair near the hearth, fingers deft and quick. You begin to see the house not just as a site of labor, but a home temporary, rented, imperfect, but still a shelter. The fire cracks again, loud enough to make several heads turn. Someone laughs and tosses in a splintered chair leg. You realize you're no longer just a visitor. You've become part of the brothel's rhythm, drawn into its quiet world of transactions, secrets, danger, and camaraderie. And in the stillness that follows the laughter, you feel time slide a little further into the night. Outside, the sky has gone completely black. No stars, just mist curling between rooftops, wrapping the city in silence. The mist presses against the window, now blurring the shapes of lanterns swinging in the street beyond. Inside, the air is thick and warm, and the shifting light of the hearth makes the plastered walls seem to move in and out of shadow. You notice how sound changes with the hour. The sharp bursts of laughter have softened, replaced by murmurs, the scrape of cups across wood, the sigh of boots dragging on the floorboards. The night is moving into that slow, heavy stretch before dawn, when the wine and ale have dulled tempers and narrowed thoughts to the simple business of the hour. The abbess closes her ledger and sets it aside. She rises without hurry, her skirts brushing against the bench, and disappears toward the rear of the building. You imagine she's checking the storeroom or quietly settling some matter you'll never know about. She's the one person here who never really sleeps. Even when she does, she must sleep like a captain on a ship, ready to wake at the sound of a slammed door, a fight in the alley, or the creak of a floorboard that shouldn't creak. You drain the last of your ale. The taste is sourer now, the dregs catching at your tongue. A serving boy no more than 14 collects your cup. He moves fast, eyes down, careful not to meet anyone's gaze for too long. Boys like him are invisible to most patrons, but they see everything. They carry messages, overhear arguments, and sometimes slip coins or notes to people outside, whether they work for the abbess or for themselves. Depends on the boy. The music has stopped. The lute lies on its side atop a table, its strings catching faint glimmers from the firelight. In the absence of music, the rhythms of the house are clearer footsteps crossing floorboards overhead, the clink of coins changing hands, the low murmur of a bouncer persuading someone it's time to leave. You catch the word Morgan morning, in his voice a reminder that this night has an end even if it's not here yet. Kathy passes by again, her hair now fully undone. She's laughing softly with another woman, a tall blonde with a pale green gown whose hem is darkened by ale stains. They're leaning into each other, sharing some joke that makes Kathy hide her face in her hands for a moment. The other woman squeezes her arm before slipping away toward the stairs. These little pockets of intimacy, friendships, sisterhoods of circumstance are the glue that holds a house together. Not every woman here likes every other, but they depend on each other in ways outsiders never fully see. You remember hearing about a brothel in Lübeck, where the women formed a pact. If one was beaten badly by a client, they would all refuse him service no matter how much coin he offered. It wasn't written down and it wasn't recognized by the law, but it worked most of the time. Men who thought they could buy anything learned quickly that the house had its own code. A door opens near the back of the room, and a gust of cooler air slips in, carrying the smell of night rain on cobblestones. Two figures enter. One is clearly a sailor, his coat heavy with salt and damp. The other might be a soldier, or at least wears the remnants of a uniform. They speak a rough mix of languages, Low German French, maybe a few scraps of English. They're tired, but their eyes scan the room quickly, assessing hunting. They've been here before, you can tell. The abbess returns, then her face unreadable. She greets them with a nod, and a few words you don't catch, then gestures toward the bar. The serving girl pours them beer without being asked. You sense that these men are regulars, perhaps favored customers. Regulars are the spine of a house's income, reliable, predictable, and more likely to behave. In some towns, brothels even kept house books for regulars, where debts could be recorded and settled later, often on payday or after a voyage. Your gaze drifts upward to the beams overhead. They're blackened with age and smoke, and faint graffiti is carved into them, names, crude drawings, dates scratched by men who wanted to leave proof of their visit. One reads Anno Domini 1382, the numbers sharp and deliberate. You wonder if the man who carved it thought he was immortalizing himself in the annals of sin, or simply marking a moment in an otherwise unremarkable life. It's easy to forget sitting here that the world outside this room is still turning. The town watch patrols the streets, making sure taverns close when they should, checking alleys for drunks or thieves. The baker's apprentice is already awake somewhere, tending the first loaves for morning. But here the hours are elastic. Some patrons will leave soon, weaving back to their lodgings. Others will sleep upstairs until midday, their coin already pocketed by the abbess. One of the sailors has drawn the attention of Marianne, the tall, magnetic woman you saw earlier. She approaches him slowly, resting a hand on the back of his chair, speaking low. He laughs, his teeth flashing in the firelight. She leans in, listening, then straightens with a smile that's just slightly sharper than polite. She's not in a hurry. The longer she keeps him talking, the better the deal she can strike. She knows the weight of his purse by the quality of his coat, the salt stains on his cuffs, the calluses on his hands. This is a trade in reading people as much as in selling anything tangible. The other sailor has already been drawn upstairs by a younger woman with a shy smile. She leads him with the ease of 100 such walks, her hand light on his arm, her voice carrying just enough promise to keep him moving. They vanish into the narrow stairwell, and the room feels smaller for their absence. You think again about the upstairs rooms, their thin walls, the soft creak of the beds, the candles guttering in their holders. In some brothels, the beds were little more than wooden boxes, with straw, the sheets changed only when absolutely necessary. In others, particularly the more expensive houses in Paris or Bruges, the beds might have proper mattresses, clean linen, even feather pillows. The quality of the room was as much a selling point as the woman herself. The abbess circles back to the fire, standing with her hands on her hips, surveying the room. She's counting, always counting patrons, women mugs of ale, sold coins, pocketed. There's a satisfaction in her eyes tonight. The house is full enough to cover its costs, perhaps even to turn a decent profit. Tomorrow she'll send a boy to the market for fresh bread, salted meat, maybe even a wheel of cheese. Small luxuries that make the house feel warmer, more alive. The fire pops, sending a shower of sparks upward. For a moment, the light catches the faces in the room, Kathy's tired but content smile, Marian's poised stillness, the sailor's half-lidded eyes, and you realize that this place, for all its hardship, is also a kind of haven. Not safe, not truly, but familiar. And in a world where streets can turn deadly in the space of a heartbeat, familiarity is worth more than gold. Outside, the rain has begun to fall soft, but steady. The sound against the shutters is oddly soothing, and for a heartbeat, you feel the urge to close your eyes, to sink into the murmuring dark of the room. But the night is not over yet, not for you and not for the house. The rain grows heavier now, tapping a more insistent rhythm on the shutters. Somewhere outside, water trickles into the gutter channels that line the narrow street, carrying the night's refuse toward the dark mouth of a drain. You picture it flowing past the boots of a watchman, past the paws of a stray dog sniffing for scraps, past doorways where beggars hunch deeper into their cloaks. In a way, the sound of the rain folds the whole town into the brothel, its alleyways, its lives all pressing close to these timbered walls. Inside, the house breathes in long, slow pulses. A chair scrapes across the floor. A woman laughs, her voice husky from smoke and wine. The bouncer mutters to a stubborn drunk who's decided, despite all logic, that he can drink until dawn without paying. The abbess glances up from the bar, and that alone is enough to make the man's courage wilt. He digs a coin from his pouch, and the bouncer relaxes. In a brothel, debts are settled quickly. They have to be. A man who leaves without paying is more than a nuisance. He's a signal to others that the house can be cheated. The serving boy is back ferrying fresh cups of ale. His sleeves are damp from brushing against tables, and his hair clings to his forehead. He slides a cup toward you without looking up, and you realize he's memorized who drinks what. This isn't hospitality, it's survival. A well-run brothel remembers its clients' habits the way a merchant remembers the needs of his best customers. Kathy is leaning now against a post, talking with the blonde in the pale green gown. Their conversation is low but animated. You catch fragments, a name you don't recognize, a complaint about. Last market day, something about a broken clasp. The blonde gestures toward the stairs with a little flick of her hand, then shakes her head sharply. Whatever offer was made or refused has ended the discussion. You wonder how often these women turn down work. Refusal isn't without risk. A displeased client might complain to the abbess. or spread his irritation to others. But sometimes the calculation is simple: better to lose one night's coin than to take the wrong man upstairs. A shout erupts from near the hearth, startling everyone. It's one of the sailors who arrived earlier, the one who stayed downstairs. His face is flushed, his words slurred, but the tone is unmistakable anger. A merchant opposite him has leaned back in his chair, arms folded, smirking. You don't know what sparked it, but in brothels, provocations can be as small as a joke told at the wrong time. The bouncer is moving before either man can stand, his hand resting on the hilt of a cudgel. The abbess appears behind him, her voice calm but sharp enough to cut through the room. She says something short, final, and the merchant stands, palms open, shrugging. The sailor exhales, shakes his head, and collapses back onto the bench. The danger passes like a sudden squall. In that moment, you see the abbess's true skill. She doesn't shout. She doesn't threaten. She uses the authority of someone who knows every face in the room, every coin in every purse, every debt owed. In a medieval brothel, keeping the peace isn't about brute force, it's about knowing exactly which threads to pull. You sip your ale again and let your gaze wander to the door. A new figure has arrived, her cloak pulled tight, water dripping from the hem. She shakes the rain from her hair and glances around quickly. She's not here for work, that much is clear. She carries herself with the guarded alertness of someone who has news. The abbess moves toward her, immediately speaking, in a low voice, steering her toward the back. They vanish into the storeroom, and the hum of the room swallows their absence. You think of all the errands, messages, and quiet arrangements that pass through these walls without ever being noticed. Brothels are more than houses of flesh, they are nodes in a web of information. Men speak freely here, looser with their tongues than in taverns or guild halls. Political gossip trades secrets, rumors of military movement. All of it drifts into the ears of women who know how to remember without appearing to listen. And sometimes those memories are worth more than gold. A chair leg snaps somewhere behind you, followed by a curse and laughter. The serving girl hauls the broken piece away and replaces it with a stool. Small accidents, constant upkeep every night, takes a little more from the house than it gives back. Woodware's thin candles burn out, straw mattresses go lumpy. The abbess's coin must stretch far, repairs, food, drink, wages, bribes, taxes. And still the house must feel full, abundant, ready to tempt. A brothel that looks desperate will draw no one. Kathy moves past you again this time, heading toward a man you hadn't noticed before. He's seated alone, a tall figure in a black hood, his hands folded on the table. He's not drinking, not speaking, just watching. The way his eyes follow her is deliberate, measured. She stops at his table, bends slightly, says something. He nods once, slowly. They remain there for a moment longer. Then she straightens and walks away without looking back. He doesn't move. Whatever just happened between them, it wasn't business. You find yourself wondering about the rules of the house. Some brothels forbade their women from taking lovers outside of work. Others turned a blind eye as long as coin kept flowing. In some places, there were whispered tales of abbesses who punished women harshly for forming attachments. Attachments made them unpredictable, distracted, prone to defiance. But love, if you can call it that, here has always found cracks to slip through. The rain softens the rhythm on the shutters, turning to a gentler patter. The air in the room feels heavier, weighted with the fatigue of the hour. Some patrons are slouched in their chairs, now eyes half closed. One man has nodded off entirely, his head resting on folded arms. No one wakes him. The bouncer keeps a watchful eye, but he's no threat, only another body passing through the long night. The abbess reappears from the back, her expression unchanged. The cloaked woman is gone. Perhaps she left through the alley, perhaps she's upstairs now. Either way, whatever news she brought will ripple through the house in its own quiet time. The fire is burning low again, logs collapsing into glowing embers. The serving boy crouches to feed it smaller sticks, coaxing the heat back to life. In the flicker of the flame, you see the house for what it truly is, a machine, each part feeding the next. The women work the patrons feed the coffers. The coffers keep the house alive, and the house gives its workers just enough to return tomorrow. Somewhere above you, a door closes softly. The sound is small, but it carries through the beams like a heartbeat. In a house like this, you learn to notice every change in rhythm, every sound that doesn't belong or belongs too perfectly. And tonight, with the rain easing and the hours stretching on, you know the night still has more to show you. The sound of that softly closing door still lingers in your mind as you shift in your seat. You realize you've been here for hours now, long enough that the faces of the room have changed more than once. Some men have come and gone entirely. Others have been replaced upstairs by new patrons. The constant is the heartbeat of the house, subtle but steady. You can feel it in the creak of the beams overhead, in the low thrum of voices, in the occasional laugh that slices through the quiet like a ripple in water. Kathy is no longer in sight. Neither is Marian. The blonde in the pale green gown moves slowly around the room, gathering empty cups and dropping them on the bar. She moves with a weariness you haven't seen earlier tonight. Her gaze unfocused, her smile gone. This is the deep hour, the one when fatigue begins to dull even the most practiced charms. The hour when business slows to a trickle, but the house must remain open for the stragglers and the restless. You take another sip of your ale flat, now warm. But it's the familiarity of the cup in your hand that steadies you. At this hour, even small rituals become anchors, the weight of the mug, the glow of the fire, the slow drift of smoke toward the rafters. In a way, these are the same things that keep the women here tethered to the house. The sameness, the repetition can be a comfort, even when the work is hard. The abbess sits at the bar now, not writing in her ledger, but speaking in low tones with the bouncer. She leans in slightly, her face unreadable. He nods once, then glances toward the door. You can tell from the way he shifts his weight that they're expecting someone or watching for someone to arrive. This is another truth about brothels. The work is not only in the rooms upstairs, it's also in the watching, the anticipating, the guarding of invisible boundaries. A faint draft creeps in as the door opens again. A man steps inside, cloaked, his hood still up. He doesn't look around much. He seems to know where he's going. The abbess watches him approach, her gaze fixed, but her posture relaxed. He murmurs something to her, and she gestures toward the back without hesitation. He slips away, and the door swings shut behind him. You catch a whiff of the night air he's brought in, damp stone, horse sweat, chimney smoke. There are times when the brothel feels less like a house of pleasure and more like a harbor. Sailors, merchants, soldiers, they come here to dock for a few hours, to be sheltered from whatever waits outside. But a harbor can also hide dangerous ships. Not every arrival is harmless, and the abbess has learned to read trouble in the tilt of a man's shoulders, in the way his eyes linger or avoid. At a nearby table, two young men are talking in low voices, their heads almost touching. They glance toward the stairs more than once, but make no move to stand. They're apprentices, perhaps, or travelers with only enough coin for ale tonight. In medieval towns, apprentices were a large part of the brothel's clientele. They lived in crowded lodgings under the watch of their masters, and nights out were both precious and rare. Coming here was as much about freedom as it was about desire. The blonde in the green gown drifts toward them, leaning lightly on the back of a chair. She teases them gently, just enough to see if they'll bite. One grins nervously. The other blushes and stares at his cup. They're not ready to climb the stairs yet, but she'll give them time. Patience is part of the trade. Sometimes the best coin comes from those who linger longest. Your eyes wander to the rafters again, where the graffiti scratches stand out sharper in the shifting light. Alongside the crude drawings are symbols you don't recognize, marks that might be merchant signs, guild insignia, or personal talismans. It's strange to think that the wooden bones of the house carry these quiet records, invisible to most who pass through. Perhaps every brothel has its ghosts carved into the grain by hands long gone. The serving boy brushes past you carrying a small tray with bread and cheese. He heads toward the bouncer, who takes it without thanks and carries it to the back room. You notice how the boy moves faster in that direction, as though errands for the rear rooms are more urgent. The back rooms are the brothel's private chambers, offices, storerooms, sometimes spaces for meetings that have nothing to do with the work upstairs. Deals are struck there, debts are settled, and occasionally guests are received who never set foot in the common room. Your ale is nearly gone, but you're reluctant to signal for more. The heaviness in the air is making your limbs sluggish, your thoughts a little soft around the edges. The warmth of the fire and the drone of voices lull you into a haze. You catch sight of Kathy again. At last she's returning from upstairs, her gown slightly wrinkled, her braid loosened. She spots you, tilts her head in a faint greeting, then makes her way to the bar. She takes water this time, drinking slowly, her eyes half closed. In the stillness of this late hour, you realize that the brothel is almost a mirror of the city outside. Both run on cycles of commerce and survival. Both rely on networks of trust and reputation. Both harbor the full spectrum of humanity, from the generous to the cruel. And in both, the truth is that safety is never absolute. It is always conditional, always contingent on who owes whom, who pays whom, and who protects whom. Somewhere upstairs, a muffled laugh echoes down the stairwell, followed by the creak of a bed. The sound is fleeting, swallowed quickly by the hum of the room. You can't tell if it belongs to joy or to performance. In this house, the difference is often blurred. The abbess rises from her seat again, crossing to the hearth. She stirs the embers with the iron poker, sending a fresh wave of sparks upward. Her face catches the firelight for a moment, lined intent but not unkind. This is a woman who knows that her livelihood depends on keeping the balance between temptation and control, between welcome and warning. The rain outside has all but stopped now, leaving only the occasional drip from the eaves. The silence between drops seems to stretch. Soon the sky will begin its slow turn toward dawn, and the city will stir. But for now, the brothel remains its own sealed world, caught in the fragile hours before the day begins. You shift again on the bench, and the thought comes unbidden: you could stay here until morning, and no one would question it. But morning will bring its own reckoning for the house, for the women, for every man who's chosen to spend the night in this place instead of in his own bed. The hush between the fading rain and the earliest stirrings of dawn is its own kind of silence, thick, watchful, almost breathing. You notice how the fire's glow has dimmed to a low red, the light barely reaching the far corners of the room. A few patrons remain their silhouettes soft in the gloom, their voices muted to near whispers. Even the bouncer, who earlier stood like a carved post near the door, has eased into a chair, his cudgel resting across his knees. Kathy sits at the bar now, her elbow on the wood head, tilted toward the abbess. They're speaking quietly, the kind of conversation that isn't for public ears. The abbess nods once, twice, her eyes narrowing. She says something that makes Kathy's mouth curve, not quite a smile, more the ghost of one. Then Kathy rises and slips away toward the stairs again. You can't tell whether she's headed for work or for sleep. At this hour, the brothel feels different. The urgency of earlier is gone, replaced by something slower, more deliberate. It's as if the house has exhaled finally, allowing itself to feel the strain of the night. The tables are cluttered with the debris of hours' empty cups, bread crusts, a slice of cheese left forgotten on a plate. The serving girl moves methodically among them, collecting and stacking, not bothering to hurry. She knows dawn is near. She's just carrying the house gently toward it. In one shadowed corner, a merchant sits alone. He's well-dressed, his boots polished despite the wet streets, his cloak draped neatly over the bench beside him. He's not here for the ale, his cup is untouched, and he hasn't looked toward the stairs. Instead, his gaze is fixed on the door, as though he's waiting for someone. Men like this are not rare in brothels. They come for meetings, for messages, for the comfort of being somewhere the watchful eyes of the city are less concerned with propriety. A brothel is in its way a sanctuary of secrets. Your mind drifts to other cities you've passed through, stories you've heard in taverns, rumors shared by traveling companions. In Avignon, you recall the brothels near the Rhone served as unofficial post offices for certain guilds. In Bruges, they were sometimes used to store goods in secret, tucked away until the time was right to move them. Even in London, the Southwark stews acted as discreet meeting places for men who wanted to strike deals without their fellow guild members knowing. The women of the house were not always privy to the details, but they knew enough to stay out of the way or to listen when listening might pay later. The merchant's wait is interrupted when the door opens with a sigh of hinges. A woman enters, older, wrapped in a plain wool cloak. She shakes rainwater from the hood and makes her way straight to his table. They speak briefly, their words too low to carry, and then she hands him a small bundle wrapped in cloth. He opens it just enough to glimpse what's inside, nods, and tucks it away beneath his cloak. No coin changes hands, at least not here. Their business concluded, she leaves as quietly as she arrived. No one comments. No one even glances toward the door after it closes. This, too, is part of the brothel's rhythm, moments of quiet exchange woven invisibly into the night's fabric. The abbess must have seen, but she says nothing. Perhaps she knows these transactions bring no trouble, or perhaps she's already accounted for them in her own ledgers. The air has cooled slightly now, the warmth of the fire unable to keep the chill entirely at bay. You pull your cloak closer and let your gaze drift to the staircase. A woman is descending slowly, her hand on the rail, her hair loose around her shoulders. She wears a chemise under a loosely tied gown, her feet bare on the steps. She doesn't seem to notice you watching. Her eyes are downcast, her thoughts elsewhere. At the bottom of the stairs, she crosses to the hearth, crouches near the embers, and holds out her hands to the faint heat. You wonder if she'll sleep here by the fire or in one of the upstairs rooms. In many houses, women claimed spaces wherever they could find them, on a bench beside the hearth, even in the kitchen if it was warm. Privacy was a luxury and comfort an accident. The constant flow of strangers through their rooms meant that nothing could truly be theirs for long. The abbess rises again, moving toward the back of the house. She gestures for the serving boy to follow. He carries a small bucket, likely bound for the pump in the yard. Even now, with dawn close, there's work to be done, water to be hauled, floors to be swept, bedding to be turned. The transformation from night to day is as important as the work itself. By evening, the house must look ready again, its grime and wear concealed beneath candlelight and carefully chosen shadows. You think of the apprentices and merchants who will return tomorrow night, none the wiser to the labor that goes into making the brothel feel effortless. The women will dress again, their hair freshly braided, or curled, their faces bright in the candlelight. The ale will flow as though it had not been watered down that very afternoon. The same songs might be sung, the same dice rattled on the tables, but it will all feel new to those who haven't seen the hours between. Somewhere above, a faint thud echoes through the beams, a door closing, a footstep crossing a bare floor. The sound is quickly swallowed by the stillness. You realize how attuned you've become to the house's noises, how each one carries meaning. Now the scrape of a chair, the creak of a step, the sigh of the shutters shifting in the wind. It's a language of its own, one that only the house's true inhabitants speak fluently. Kathy reappears at last, descending the stairs, with the slow grace of someone who knows she's being watched, even if she pretends otherwise. She crosses to the bar, exchanges a few words with the abbess, and then disappears into the back. You don't see her again for the rest of the hour. Outside, the sky is lightening just enough to tint the edges of the shutters with gray. The rain has stopped completely, leaving the street outside slick and shining. Somewhere in the distance, a cock crows its call, muffled by the walls but still clear enough to mark the coming change. The brothel does not empty all at once. It thins slowly like a tide retreating from the shore. A man at the far table stands, stretches, and slips out into the damp street. The merchant in the corner finally drains his untouched cup and follows suit. Even the bouncer stirs, rising to his feet, rolling his shoulders as though shaking off the night's weight. The abbess remains, of course. She'll stay until the last patron leaves, until the last cup is washed, until the last bed is stripped. Then, and only then, will she rest briefly before the cycle begins again. You feel the night loosening its hold on you, even as part of you resists the coming day. There's something in these late hours, in this fragile balance of exhaustion and vigilance that holds you here. You know you'll remember it long after you step back into the waking world outside. The gray at the edges of the shutters deepens, softening into that pale, reluctant light that comes just before the sun fully declares itself. The fire in the hearth is nearly spent, its embers a sullen red offering little heat. The air has cooled enough for you to notice the damp in your clothes, a chill that seeps in when the warmth of the night finally lets go. The room is quieter still. Only a handful of patrons remain, and even they seem adrift in the liminal hour between night and morning. One man has given up on conversation entirely and leans against the wall with his eyes closed, arms folded, his breath slow and even. The serving girl stacks cups in uneven towers, balancing them with the precision of long practice, while the serving boy sweeps crumbs and ash from under the benches. Their movements are slow, deliberate. There's no rush now, only the quiet labor of closing the night. The abbess sits once more at her favored spot near the bar, a small ledger open before her. She writes with a quill that has seen many such mornings, pausing now and then to glance around the room as though accounting for not just the coin, but the people themselves. You realize she's doing more than keeping financial records. She's taking stock of the night, what went right, what went wrong, who might need a quiet word before the next evening begins. In her own way, she's running a ship charting its course through waters that change with every tide. A faint knock comes from the door. It's so soft at first you think you've imagined it. The bouncer rises, stretches once, and opens it a crack. Outside stands a young woman you've never seen before. Her hair is plastered to her cheeks from the rain, and her gown clings damply to her frame. She carries no bundle, no purse. She says something quickly, urgently, and the bouncer glances toward the abbess. The abbess stands, takes a slow step forward, and studies the newcomer for a long moment, before nodding once. The girl is let in. She moves hesitantly into the room, her eyes darting over the faces here. The abbess gestures her toward the back without ceremony, and she obeys. You don't see her again that morning, but you know what you've just witnessed: the arrival of someone looking for work or sanctuary. In the medieval world, those two were sometimes the same thing. The brothel was often a refuge for women with few other options, widows without dowries, girls who'd run from cruel masters, wives escaping violent husbands, or simply those whose families could no longer or would no longer support them. The work was dangerous, yes, but it could also be a form of survival, a way to carve out a sliver of control in a world that offered women so little. You recall the story of a house in Frankfurt where a girl barely 16 arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back. Within a month, she was one of the abbess's best-earning women, her quick wit and sharper tongue drawing patrons who came as much for her conversation as for her body. She saved enough to buy her own gowns, to pay off her debts, and eventually to leave for a smaller town where she opened an alehouse. These stories are rare, but they happen often enough to become a kind of whispered folklore among the women, proof that you might escape if you're clever, lucky, and patient. The abbess closes her ledger and rises again. She walks the length of the room, her eyes sweeping over every table, every chair. It's not inspection so much as reassurance, making sure her house is intact, that the night hasn't left it cracked or frayed in ways that will show later. She pauses by the hearth, stirs the embers once more, then lets them die. A man at one of the nearer tables stirs from his doze, blinking slowly, as though waking from a dream. He looks around, startled to find the room so empty, then chuckles to himself. With an effort, he pushes to his feet, collects his cloak, and offers a small bow to no one in particular, before shuffling to the door. The bouncer lets him out the hinges, groaning faintly. The sound of the street leaks in for a moment. A cartwheel splashing through a puddle, the distant clop of hooves, the faint call of a bread seller starting his rounds. The city is waking. You feel it in your bones, the way the brothel's spell is loosening with every passing minute. Kathy appears again, this time wearing a plain shawl over her gown. She walks not toward the bar or the stairs, but toward the door, speaking quietly with the bouncer before slipping outside. You wonder if she's heading home or if home for her is simply wherever she happens to sleep after her last patron. Some women maintain small lodgings outside the house paid for with their own earnings. Others sleep here between shifts, their rooms upstairs, doubling as both workplace and bedchamber. The blonde in the pale green gown follows not long after, carrying her shoes in one hand, her bare feet silent on the wooden floor. She offers the abbess a brief nod before stepping out into the gray morning. Her gown sways around her ankles, the hem still dark with ale stains from the night before. She'll wash it, mend it, be ready again before the next evening. There's a strange peace to these moments as the brothel exhales the night's tension and settles into quiet. The patrons are gone, the women dispersed, and what remains is the skeleton of the house, benches, tables, the smell of smoke in the beams, the faint perfume lingering in the air. Without the bodies, without the music, without the press of voices, you can see its bones clearly, and they are not beautiful. They are worn, patched, practical. A shell that comes alive only when filled. The abbess takes her place at the bar one last time. She speaks briefly to the serving boy who nods and vanishes toward the kitchen. Then she leans on the counter, her shoulders dropping just slightly. This is her briefest moment of rest before she too retreats into the private spaces at the back. You think of the night just past, of the laughter and the tension, the sudden arrivals and quiet departures, the countless negotiations carried out in glances and whispers. All of it has been folded into the house now absorbed into its walls. Tomorrow night, it will begin again, just as it has for years, perhaps decades, and each time it will look different, and yet exactly the same. The last of the embers fade, and the hearth is only shadow. The room is cool, dim, and still. Outside, the light has shifted from gray to the first pale gold of the sun, touching the upper windows of the street. You know you should rise, gather your cloak, and step out into the morning. But for a moment, you let yourself remain, savoring the last breaths of the night, before the day takes it all away. You stand at last to the bench, groaning softly under your weight, and stretch the stiffness from your shoulders. The bouncer glances over but doesn't move to stop you. Your time here has run its natural course. The abbess is gone now, vanished into the private rooms at the back. The serving girl is sweeping near the hearth, her broom moving in lazy arcs. No one says farewell. In a brothel, departures are unremarkable, just another breath in the long exhale of morning. The door resists you at first, swollen from the night's rain, but the bouncer leans his shoulder against it, and it swings outward with a tired creak. A cool draft curls around your ankles, carrying the scent of wet stone ash and the faint, sharp tang of horse dung from the street. You step outside. The transformation is striking. Gone is the golden flicker of the hearth, the muffled closeness of the brothel's air. Out here, the world is wide and washed in soft gray light. The street is slick, underfoot puddles reflecting the crooked silhouettes of timbered houses. Water drips steadily from eaves and gutters, splashing into the narrow channels that run along the road's edge. The rain has scrubbed the air clean, leaving it cool enough to bite a little when you draw a deep breath. The city is waking. You can hear it in the clop of hooves as a cart passes, the driver slouched forward in his seat, the mule steaming in the chill. A baker's boy hurries past a basket balanced on his hip, its cloth cover already spotted with grease. Somewhere farther down the street, a woman's voice calls the price of onions her cry, sharp and musical against the damp air. You glance back once at the brothel. In daylight, its facade looks unremarkable, a narrow leaning structure with warped shutters and a door set slightly askew. You could pass it a dozen times and never guess what went on inside unless you already knew. That's the way most of these houses survive, blending into the street, invisible until you're inside. You walk on. The street twists and narrows its cobblestones uneven beneath your boots. Shops are opening their shutters. A tavern spills the smell of stale beer and smoke into the morning air. A cooper rolls an empty barrel toward his workshop, its iron hoops clanking against the stones. The brothel already feels like a dream, one of those strange, layered dreams where the edges blur as soon as you leave them. Yet you carry pieces of it with you. The soft murmur of voices, the heavy scent of tallow candles, the way Kathy's braid loosened over the course of the night, the flash of Marion's smile in firelight. These fragments cling to you like the smell of smoke on your clothes. As you pass a side alley, a figure steps out, one of the sailors from last night. His coat is damp, his hair plastered to his forehead. He nods at you, recognition in his eyes, but says nothing. He's carrying a small bundle under one arm. You wonder if it holds gifts bought in town, or if it's simply his clean shirt for the day ahead. He turns toward the riverfront without looking back. The closer you get to the market square, the busier the streets become. Stalls are going up poles, clattering into sockets. Canvas awnings flapping as they're tied into place. Merchants haggle over positions, arguing in half a dozen languages. The smell of raw fish competes with that of hot bread, fresh herbs, and wet wool cloaks steaming in the early sun. Somewhere nearby, a man tunes a lute, plucking each string with slow precision. It's here amid the growing bustle that you realize how many of the city's rhythms are invisible to most of its people. Few of these market-goers will think about the brothels tucked into side streets, yet the brothel is as much a part of the city's economy as the baker or the fishmonger. Sailors spend their coin there before heading upriver. Merchants end their trading days with a visit softening deals over ale and warmth. Even the city's officials take their cut, whether through taxes, licensing, or less official channels. You pause near a stall selling cheap wooden combs and beads. The vendor, a thin woman with sharp eyes, greets you with a nod. Her hands are busy arranging her wares, but her gaze flicks now and then toward the alley behind her. You follow her glance and see another woman leaning against a wall there, plainly dressed. But her stance and the way she watches passers-by tells you she's selling more than combs. She meets your eyes for a moment, unreadable, then looks away. The trade happens everywhere, not just behind licensed doors. Beyond the market square rises the spire of the parish church, its bells just beginning to chime the hour. Their sound ripples through the streets, mingling with the calls of merchants and the bark of a dog chasing a cart. The bells mark more than just time, they remind you of the moral balance the city pretends to keep. The church condemns the trade you've just left behind, yet its shadow falls over every street where it happens. And sometimes, in more ways than one, the two worlds are not so far apart. You make your way toward the river, drawn by the scent of tar and salt. The wharves are crowded with ships of every size, river barges, unloading barrels of herring, seagoing cogs with their sails furled, tight fishing boats bringing in the morning's catch. Dock workers shout to one another. Ropes creak, gulls scream overhead. Somewhere on this waterfront, the sailors from last night will find their way back to their ships. Their pockets lighter, their steps slower. The coin they've left behind in the brothel will ripple outward, paying for bread candles, perhaps even for the repair of that creaking stair you climbed in the dark. For a moment you stand still, watching the water move under the gray sky. It carries away the rain from the night before, the dirt and refuse of the streets, perhaps even a little of the scent of the brothel itself. But the memory stays with you. Places like that don't wash away so easily. The river's slow churn draws you onward past the bustle of the docks and into narrower lanes where the buildings lean so close overhead they almost touch. You've left the market chatter behind. Here the streets are hushed, except for the occasional clatter of a pail or the shuffle of a baker's apprentice on his way to deliver loaves. A month passes in your mind's wandering, though. In truth, it's just a few days before you find yourself in a different city entirely. Bruges this time, its canals glinting under a pale, wintry sun, its stepped gabled houses reflected in water the color of tarnished silver. The air smells of peat smoke and brewing hops, and the streets echo, with the creak of wagons rolling over the worn stone bridges. Bruges is wealthy, fatter in coin than many towns you've seen, and the business of pleasure thrives accordingly. Here, the brothel quarter is no secret. The Vrouwenhuis, or women's house, is marked plainly enough by a painted sign, a red-hooded woman lifting a goblet in one hand, a purse in the other. The paint is faded, but the meaning is unmistakable. The building is broader than the one you left behind in your last city, with stout brick walls and tall, narrow windows, latticed with lead. You step inside. The air is warmer than you expect, thick with the scent of spiced wine and roasting meat. This house caters to merchants, sailors from the Hanseatic ports, and even visiting nobles who prefer to remain discreet. The room you enter first is almost tavern-like. Long benches, sturdy tables, a polished counter behind which a girl pours drinks from a tall, green-glazed pitcher. The women here are better dressed than in the last brothel you knew. Their gowns are brighter trimmed with cheap but flashy beads, their hair neatly coiled and pinned. The abbess, though here she is called the moeder, the mother is a tall woman in a dark wool gown with a heavy chain at her belt. She greets you with a nod, her manner brisk but not unfriendly. In Bruges, the moeder is often licensed by the city itself, her name entered in civic rolls. She is a businesswoman paying annual fees for the privilege of operating openly. In return, she and her women are under certain protections. They cannot be harassed by constables without cause, and they have the right to eject unruly clients without fear of retaliation. You take a seat at a long table. A young woman in a scarlet kirtle brings you a cup of wine, its sweetness undercut by a faint medicinal bitterness, perhaps cloves or myrrh. As she sets it down, she smiles quickly, then turns to greet another guest. The pace here is brisk but practiced. Women move between tables with easy familiarity, their laughter genuine enough to be convincing, though you've learned by now how much of that is performance. Above the murmur of conversation, you hear music, an actual fiddler in the corner, playing a tune that winds easily around the voices. This is a house that invests in its atmosphere. The warmth, the food, the music, even the scent of spiced drink, all of it, is designed to loosen coin from purse without a patron realizing how much he spends. A merchant in a fur-lined cap sits opposite you, his cheeks ruddy from drink. He raises his cup in greeting, then leans forward to confide in you, though you've given him no reason to trust you. He speaks of a deal struck earlier that day. For a cargo of English wool, the price lowered after a quiet word from a friend he met in this very house. You realize the brothel here serves not just as a place for fleshly trade, but as a meeting ground for commerce where alliances are formed over wine and whispers. The moeder glides past your table, her keen eyes sweeping the room. She exchanges a few words with the fiddler, who shifts to a livelier tune. At the far end of the hall, a side door opens to a staircase that curves upward. A pair of men are led that way by women who touch their arms lightly, speaking just loudly enough to be overheard by those who might follow their example. You've heard Bruges keeps its brothels cleaner than most. City ordinances require fresh bedding, weekly floors scrubbed with sand, and water windows opened daily for air. Whether these rules are always followed is another matter, but here the air is fresher, the linens less worn. Disease is a constant specter in all such houses, but Bruges' officials are strict about containing outbreaks less for the women's sake than for the merchants whose coin fuels the city's trade. As the night stretches, you note the subtle differences in rhythm. The women here are less hurried perhaps because patrons spend longer over their wine-talking business or news from the ports. A Hanseatic captain boasts of a storm he weathered on the way from Danzig. A Flemish cloth seller haggles with a man who might be a buyer from Lübeck. The brothel hums with this mixture of desire and commerce, each feeding the other. A young woman named Els, her fair hair tucked under a thin linen veil, pauses by your table. She doesn't sit. Instead, she leans close to murmur something about a quieter room upstairs. Her tone is warm but measured, the offer clear, yet not insistent. When you decline, she only smiles and moves on her skirts, brushing lightly against your knee as she goes. You realize that here, more than in other houses you've known, the selling is subtle. This is a house for men who want to believe they've chosen freely, not been coaxed. The women keep the balance between presence and absence, letting the patron fill in the space with his own imagination. From your seat, you can see the open door to the kitchen. A spit turns slowly over a small fire, fat hissing as it drips onto the coals. The smell of roasting goose mixes with the sharper scent of onions frying in a pan. In this brothel, a meal might be part of the lure, especially for travelers arriving after days at sea or weeks on the road. Good food, warm drink, pleasant company, all the elements of a night that feels worth paying for. The fiddler's tune slows. A few patrons stand stretching before making their way upstairs or out into the street. You sip the last of your wine and glance toward the moeder, who is now speaking with a man in the livery of a noble household. She gestures toward the stairs and he nods, producing a small purse from his belt. The exchange is smooth, almost formal. In this house, even the transactions carry a sheen of respectability. You understand now that every city's brothel is a mirror of its own character. The one you left behind before Bruges was shadowy, cautious, a place of survival in narrow alleys. Here the house is part of the city's pulse woven into its mercantile fabric. Both serve the same need, but each wears a different mask. And as you drain your cup, you know there are other masks yet to see. You leave Bruges behind, its warm, brick-walled brothels fading in your memory, like a hearth fire seen from the road. The journey east is long and damp, the roads heavy with mud, and the nights spent in cold roadside inns, where even the ale tastes of rainwater. When you arrive at your next destination, Cologne, you find the air sharper, the streets narrower, and the faces more watchful. Here the cathedral looms over the city, like a stern guardian, its spires catching the clouds. The bells mark the hours with an authority that seems to press down on the streets themselves. This is a city where the church's voice carries far, and yet just as in every city you've seen, pleasure finds a way to survive. But in Cologne it survives cautiously, like a candle cupped against the wind. The brothels here are less open, hidden behind unmarked doors, or tucked above taverns where the ale is cheap, and the rooms darker still. Locals call them Freudenhäuser, in whispers houses of joy, but the joy is measured, rationed carefully against the risk. The city's ordinances are strict prostitutes, may not walk the main streets, may not wear bright colors, and must keep their hair bound and covered when outside the house. You find the one you are looking for, not by sign or symbol, but by arrangement. An introduction from a man you met in the market, who spoke of a place for warmth, with a glance that carried more meaning than the words. He leads you down a twisting lane to a narrow building wedged between a cooper's workshop and a storehouse for wool. From the street, it could be any dwelling. The shutters are closed, the woodwork plain. Inside, the change is immediate. The air is heavy with candle smoke, the light dim enough that faces melt into shadow. A small anteroom holds a bench, a brazier for warmth, and a woman seated near the door. She's plainly dressed in dark wool, her hair covered by a simple cap. She greets you, not with a smile, but with a quick, assessing look, then gestures you toward a second door. Beyond it, the house opens just enough to breathe. A narrow hall runs between small rooms, their doors half closed. A single long table in the main chamber holds mugs of beer and a few bowls of stew. The women here are quieter than in Bruges, their voices low, their laughter infrequent. They do not flit from table to table. Instead, they stand in pairs or sit apart, speaking to those they already know. The abbess here, simply called the Hausfrau, is a woman of indeterminate age, her hair hidden her gown unadorned. She moves with purpose, pausing to exchange a few words with a patron, to adjust the wick of a candle, to beckon a serving boy toward the back. She does not hover, but she notices everything. In a city like Cologne, the brothel's safety depends on her constant awareness. You sit at the end of the long table. A woman with dark eyes and a crooked smile takes the bench across from you. She doesn't ask your name. Instead, she pours you beer from a clay pitcher and says, "It's cold tonight," in a tone that feels both casual and weighted. This is the beginning of the negotiation. Small talk, yes, but also a testing of boundaries. In this house, there is no aggressive selling. Every conversation is careful, deliberate. From what you've heard, the penalties for breaking the rules here are harsh. A woman caught soliciting in the wrong part of town can be fined heavily, even whipped. A house accused of harboring unlicensed women might be closed without warning, its inhabitants scattered. The Hausfrau must keep careful accounts not only of coin, but of comings and goings. If the watch arrives, and they do often, she must be able to produce names, licenses, and proof of taxes paid. You notice a small book on the shelf behind her desk. In it, she keeps the names of her regular clients, their preferred days and times, even their favored drinks. It's not sentiment, it's strategy. In a city where trade must stay hidden, the safest income is predictable income. She would rather see the same trusted patrons week after week than gamble on strangers who might bring trouble through the door. There's little music here, only the low hum of conversation and the occasional creak of a chair. The lighting's kept dim, both for privacy and to soften the age and wear of the rooms. The beer is thin but warm, the stew plain but filling. Everything about the house feels designed to reassure, to keep the senses calm. And yet beneath the quiet, there's tension. You can see it in the way the women glance toward the door when it opens, in how the Hausfrau straightens slightly at unfamiliar footsteps. Every arrival is a risk, every departure a small relief. In Cologne, the business is not only in selling pleasure, but in surviving scrutiny. A man in a heavy cloak enters, now shaking rain from his shoulders. He greets the Hausfrau by name, removes his gloves, and accepts a mug of beer from the serving boy. He sits with one of the women without ceremony, as though this has been arranged long in advance. Their conversation is quiet, their gestures small. The transaction here is less about seduction and more about familiarity. You think of how different this is from the warmth of Bruges, or the weary but open camaraderie of the London stews. Here, every smile is calculated, every laugh measured against the room's mood. The brothel must be invisible to the city, while still being visible enough to those who seek it. It's a delicate balance, one misstep away from collapse. The Hausfrau passes by your table, pausing just long enough to ask if you need anything. Her voice is polite, her expression unreadable. She is not here to charm you. She is here to keep the house standing another night. In Cologne, that is enough. You sip your beer and realize that in a place like this, the pleasures sold are quieter, but no less real. They are found in the warmth of a mug held between cold hands, in the steady murmur of a familiar voice, in the fleeting moment when the door closes against the city outside. And in a world where the shadow of the cathedral falls over every street, even such small pleasures are hard-won. You leave Cologne with the weight of its watchful silence still pressing on your shoulders. Southward, the road winds through hills and valleys, the air growing warmer, the light softer. The scent of rosemary and wild thyme replaces the damp chill of the north, and by the time you cross into the Italian city-states, the streets themselves feel looser, more inclined toward display. Florence greets you with color and noise. Market stalls crowd the piazzas, bright awnings snapping in the breeze. The air hums with the clang of hammers from goldsmiths' workshops. The sing-song calls of fruit sellers, the high chatter of apprentices darting between errands. The city's grandeur is everywhere in the soaring facades of palazzi, in the glint of marble underfoot, in the steady rhythm of bells marking both time and authority. Here, the brothel is not hidden in narrow shadows, nor is it a quiet backroom arrangement. It occupies a space at once visible and controlled, a tolerated spectacle managed by the city's own hand. Officially, prostitution is regulated by the Ufficio delle Meretrici, a municipal office tasked with licensing women, assigning them quarters, and collecting fees. The logic, as the city fathers would explain, is moral hygiene better to have vice in a single gilded cage than scattered wild through the streets. The house you step into sits just off a busy street, its facade painted in warm terracotta, with a wooden balcony draped in bright cloth. By day, it could pass for a merchant's home. By night, lanterns burn in the upper windows, throwing a honeyed glow onto the street below. A carved sign, subtle but not invisible, bears the outline of a woman's veil. Inside, the air is perfumed with a blend of rosewater lavender and the sharper note of burning resin. The entry hall is wide with tiled floors in a geometric pattern and a low arched ceiling painted with vines and flowers. A servant offers you watered wine in a glass goblet, not a clay cup, but glass, a luxury meant to set the tone. The Madame la Padrona descends from an upper stair in a gown of deep blue velvet, her hair covered by a sheer silk veil edged in gold thread. She greets you with a warmth that feels rehearsed, but no less effective. In Florence, appearances are everything, and La Padrona knows how to present her house as both respectable and enticing. The women here are dressed to the city's regulations, no silk or gold, like the noble ladies, but gowns of fine wool in rich colors, the sleeves tied on with ribbons, their hair loose but adorned with simple beads. Each wears a veil as required, though the fabrics are light enough to suggest more than they conceal. The city demands these distinctions to mark them apart from honest women, but in truth, the effect is its own kind of allure. You are shown into the main salon, a high-ceilinged room lit by multiple lanterns that make the space glow. Cushioned benches line the walls. A low table in the center holds plates of figs, almonds, and candied citrus peel. A lute player sits in the corner, her fingers weaving a soft accompaniment to the murmur of conversation. Patrons mingle here openly, merchants in fur-trimmed cloaks, visiting scholars in plain black robes, young men with the nervous eagerness of apprentices. The women move among them like dancers engaging in a performance as carefully staged as any in the piazza outside. They pour wine, laugh at jokes, trade compliments that sparkle without cutting too deep. Every gesture is deliberate, a tilt of the head, a hand resting briefly on a patron's arm, a glance that lingers just long enough to suggest possibility. In Florence, the brothel is not only a place of transaction. It is a stage where men come to play roles as much as to seek pleasure. The merchant becomes the gallant courtier. The student becomes the worldly man of taste. The women are both partners in and directors of this charade, guiding the performance toward the inevitable conclusion upstairs. The upper rooms are reached by a sweeping staircase that splits into two narrower flights at a landing. Your guide for the evening, a woman named Isabetta, leads you upward. She speaks easily as you climb, telling you of a poetry contest held in the piazza earlier that day, of a new tapestry being woven for a noble household. Whether these are her true interests or part of her trained charm, you cannot tell, but her voice carries the rhythm of someone accustomed to holding attention. Her chamber is small, but finely kept. Plaster walls whitewashed clean, a bed draped in embroidered linen, a chest at its foot, a ceramic pitcher and basin in the corner. A sprig of rosemary rests on the pillow, its scent sharp and fresh. In the corner stands a painted folding screen, its panels decorated with flowers and birds. This is not luxury by noble standards, but it speaks of care and an intent to impress. Florence's authorities inspect such rooms regularly, not for comfort, but for compliance. Bedding must be aired weekly, chamber pots emptied, daily windows kept unblocked. The inspector's visits are as much about control as about cleanliness. They remind La Padrona that her privilege to operate exists only by the city's grace. Back in the salon, you notice how fluidly the night flows. Patrons arrive and depart in a steady rhythm, some lingering over wine and conversation for hours, before heading upstairs, others vanishing after a short negotiation. There is little of the blunt transaction you saw in Cologne, or the boisterous camaraderie of Bruges. Here, everything is wrapped in silk and candlelight, and the coin changes hands almost invisibly. But beneath the polish lies the same truth as in any city. The women's lives are bound by the house's rules and by the debts that keep them there. Some may earn enough to leave. Others find their obligations endlessly renewed by the cost of gowns, food, and lodging. And though the law offers protection from street harassment, it does not shield them from the dangers that come with the work itself. You leave the house late, stepping back into the night air, scented faintly with wood smoke and the damp of the Arno. Lanterns sway above the street, their light catching the wet cobblestones. Somewhere in the distance, the bells mark the hour. Behind you, the brothel's facade glows warmly, its windows spilling light into the dark. It strikes you that in Florence, the brothel is both theater and truth, a place where every gesture is rehearsed, every glance considered, but where human longing, whether for touch, for company, or for escape, remains as raw as anywhere else. The road to Venice is less a road, and more a winding approach through marsh and water, the land giving way to long causeways and narrow wooden bridges. By the time you reach the lagoon, the air smells of brine and tar gulls wheel overhead, and the city rises like a mirage of stone and water. Here the streets are canals, the footsteps of the world replaced by the quiet slap of oars. Venice greets you in masks, even when it is not carnival season. The city is always performing, and nowhere is this truer than in its trade of pleasure. Unlike Florence's bright salons or Cologne's guarded rooms, Venice hides nothing and conceals everything all at once. Brothels here are part of the public life of the city, yet they live in the folds of its labyrinth, in narrow campielli, and on half-forgotten quays where lanterns sway above lapping water. The government of Venice, practical, worldly, and deeply entangled in commerce, regulates its brothels with a shrewd hand. Prostitutes are licensed, inspected, taxed, and in some cases housed by the state itself. The official reasoning is blunt: better to contain vice and profit from it than drive it into the shadows where disease and scandal grow unchecked. But there is another layer to the arrangement. Venetian authorities also know that foreign merchants visiting dignitaries and sailors from half the world's ports expect this part of the city's hospitality. Your first steps into a Venetian house of pleasure are through a heavy curtain that swallows the watery light outside. Within, you find yourself in a long, low-ceilinged room whose plastered walls are painted with scenes of lovers in gardens, their faces coy behind gauzy veils. Lamps hang from iron hooks, casting a golden haze over the space. The air smells faintly of musk wine and the salt the sea leaves on everything. The Madame la Madre de la Casa is a small woman in a gown of dark damask, her hair hidden beneath a crisp linen veil. Her voice carries easily over the murmur of the room, and when she greets you, her eyes seem to take in every detail at once: your boots still damp from the key, the cut of your cloak, the weight of the purse at your belt. She gestures toward a table near the center of the room, where a jug of ruby-colored wine waits beside small plates of olives, almonds, and slices of salted fish. Here the women are dressed to a distinctive Venetian code. Some wear bright scarves wound about their hair. Others drape fine sheer veils over their faces, lifting them only to drink or to speak softly to a patron. In certain districts, the city even requires prostitutes to bare their breasts in public during certain hours, an ostentatious brazen advertisement that leaves little doubt about their trade. It is at once a display of control and a gesture toward a kind of theater that Venice embraces in all its public life. The brothel's common room is busy tonight. Sailors from Ragusa share a bench with German merchants, their cups clinking as they trade coarse jokes. A young man in a scholar's gown sits stiffly in a corner, listening intently to the woman beside him, as though she's recounting the secrets of an ancient text. Laughter rises from a table near the door, where a masked man, his beak-nosed bauta concealing all but his mouth, plays a game of dice with a woman whose kirtle is cut daringly low. Venice blurs the line between brothel and carnival hall. Here, anonymity is a commodity as much as touch or companionship. The mask frees the wearer from identity, allowing men to play at being someone else entirely or no one at all. In these rooms, names matter less than the role you choose for the night. Upstairs, the rooms are small but comfortable, their windows opening onto canals that whisper against the stone foundations below. The beds are wide enough for 2, sometimes 3, and dressed in linens washed with seawater and scented faintly with lemon peel. The walls are painted or hung with cloth to keep out the damp. Some rooms even have small balconies from which you can watch the moon lay silver paths across the water. In Venice, the trade is as much about setting as it is about service. The city knows its image romantic, dangerous, decadent, and the brothels mirror it perfectly. Some women here specialize in roles that feel like living paintings. The courtesan who recites Petrarch by heart, the Turkish beauty dressed in silks and jangling bracelets, the playful gondoliera who pretends she might row you across the lagoon herself. It's theater, but theater with a price. The city keeps close watch. Inspectors, often discreetly dressed clerks of the state, visit unannounced to check licenses, count the number of women in a house, and ensure that taxes are being paid. These same officials may return later as patrons, their dual roles accepted as part of the city's pragmatism. Venice tolerates much, but it does not tolerate unpaid dues. As the night deepens, the water outside becomes ink black, and the sound of oars fades to occasional splashes. Inside the brothel hums on. A masked merchant tells a story of a storm off Crete, embellishing it more with each telling. A woman in a scarlet veil slips from table to table, her bracelets chiming softly in the candlelight. The dice game at the door breaks into cheers as the masked man wins another throw, his companion kissing his cheek in mock celebration. From your seat, you can see the curtain at the entrance sway as a new figure steps inside another mask, this one plain and white, the eyes dark hollows. He pauses to survey the room before moving toward a woman seated alone near the window. She rises to meet him without a word, and together they vanish upstairs. You drink the last of your wine and look around one more time. Venice's brothel is not the most dangerous you've seen, nor the most discreet, but it is perhaps the most perfectly matched to its city, a place where performance is woven so tightly into life that you cannot see where one ends and the other begins. Here, vice is not hidden or denied. It is dressed, masked, and paraded as part of the great ongoing show. And as you step back through the curtain into the damp night, you realize that in Venice, the brothel is just another mask the city wears one it will never remove. The memory of Venice's lantern-lit canals fades as you travel inland once more. The road is quieter now, and the air carries a different tension, one that clings to the skin. War has passed through here recently. You see it in the blackened shells of farmhouses, in the half-empty villages where shutters are drawn even in daylight. News travels in fragments, a siege lifted, but not forgotten skirmishes still flaring along the borders. And in its wake, famine gnaws at the countryside while the whispers of plague drift like smoke. When you reach the city gates, the mood is heavier than in any place you've yet seen. Guards in mismatched armor check every traveler, their faces drawn, their hands quick to the hilts of their weapons. Inside, the streets are hushed, the market square only half filled with stalls. You smell vinegar and smoke, both used to ward off sickness, and in the corners of the piazza, you spot the red-marked doors of houses where plague has already taken hold. You find the brothel not through signs or introductions, but by the faint pulse of music in the stillness. It's housed in what was once a merchant's townhouse, the plaster cracked, the shutters sagging. The door opens slowly to your knock, and you're met by a woman with a kerchief over her mouth and nose. Her eyes study you in silence before she steps aside. Inside, the air is close, scented with smoke from burning herbs, sage, rosemary, juniper meant to cleanse the air. A brazier burns low in the corner, and every window is shuttered tight against the night. The common room is smaller than most. You've seen its benches pulled close to the fire. Fewer women work here now. Sickness has taken, some others have fled. Those who remain move with careful reserve, speaking in quiet tones. The madam, an angular woman in a faded crimson gown, watches everything from her seat near the hearth. Her gown's once bright color is dulled to bricket seams mended in several places. She wears no veil or mask, though a sprig of rosemary is tucked into the bodice as a charm against the air. Her gaze is sharp, measuring, but there's a weariness beneath it that she doesn't bother to hide. The patrons here are few and subdued. A soldier with a bandaged hand sits hunched over a cup of wine, his eyes fixed on the fire. A trader in a stained wool cloak keeps to himself at a corner table, speaking only to request more ale. Conversation, when it comes, is short and murmured. This is not a place for revelry, it is a place for forgetfulness, for the briefest slip of escape from the weight outside the walls. You take a seat near the fire, the heat a comfort against the creeping damp. One of the women approaches, not with the bright smile of Venice or the rehearsed charm of Florence, but with a cautious nod. She sits beside you without asking, pulling her shawl closer around her shoulders. Her name is Katerina, she says, though she adds with a half smile. Names change often these days. She speaks of the city's curfew, of the patrols that sweep the streets for the sick and the desperate. She tells you how the brothel has become a refuge of sorts, not just for the women who work here, but for those who pass through seeking warmth and food in exchange for whatever coin or goods they can spare. Some nights the madam opens the kitchen to the truly destitute, letting them sleep by the hearth if there's space. But that kindness has its limits. In a time when food itself is currency, every act of charity must be weighed against survival. Upstairs, many of the rooms are empty now. Those still in use are kept cleaner than you expect, bedding washed in boiling water basins, scrubbed with lye. The madam insists on these measures both to protect the women and to reassure the patrons that the house is safer than the street. But everyone here knows there is no true safety, not from plague, not from war, not from the slow grind of hunger. The rules are stricter now. No patron enters without washing hands in the basin by the door. No woman works more than a set number of clients in a night. If anyone shows signs of fever, they are turned away immediately, no matter the loss in coin. The brothel survives by treading a thin line between risk and caution, and the madam walks it with the precision of someone who knows a single misstep could shutter the house forever. As the evening deepens, the soldier in the corner begins to hum a low tune, something mournful, perhaps a marching song from before the war turned sour. Katerina listens, her face unreadable. When he finishes, she stands, crosses the room, and pours him another cup without asking for payment. In return, he murmurs something you can't catch, and for the briefest moment, her shoulders ease. You realize that here the transactions are not only in coin. A loaf of bread, a strip of dried meat, a few candles all have value. The women barter for these as readily as for silver pennies. The brothel's storeroom holds not just ale and bedding, but jars of preserved fruit sacks of grain and small bundles of herbs gathered from the countryside. In a time when markets are emptying and traders are scarce, such supplies are more precious than any jewel. The night winds down without songs, without dice, without the easy chatter you've heard in other houses. Instead, the fire burns low, and the women gather close to it, their shawls drawn tight, their voices low. They speak of news from other cities, how the sickness spreads faster along the roads, how some towns have closed their gates entirely, how soldiers now guard not only borders, but wells. When you leave, the streets are silent, but for the distant sound of a church bell marking the hour. The air is cold and heavy, the shadows deep between the buildings. Behind you, the brothel's door closes softly, sealing in its fragile warmth. Out here, the world feels thinner, stretched taut by hunger, fear, and grief. And you understand that in times like these, a brothel is not simply a place for pleasure. It is a shelter built in the teeth of the storm, holding out against the dark for as long as its candles will burn. You have traveled far through alleys and canals, market squares and plague-shadowed streets, but the door you open tonight could be almost anywhere. The air smells faintly of wood smoke and tallow. The sound within is the same low murmur you've heard in Bruges, Florence, Venice, Cologne. The brothel greets you like a dream you've stepped into before, one that changes its face but never its heart. It's not grand, not ragged, somewhere in between. The beams overhead are black with age. The walls are whitewashed but worn. A fire burns in the hearth, and the uneven floorboards creak as you step across them. The abbess. Another abbess different from those before, yet somehow the same, sits near the bar, her gown plain but well kept. She watches without speaking, measuring you with the quiet confidence of someone who knows her place and her work. The women move among the patrons in slow arcs, the pace unhurried. It's not the feverish hour of peak business. Instead, the house hums with the gentle steadiness of an evening that will last until dawn. A merchant tells a quiet story to the woman beside him, her head tilted just enough to show she's listening. A pair of apprentices roll dice on a side table, grinning at each other's luck. You take a seat on a bench near the fire. The heat seeps into your legs, and you feel the familiar pull of the brothel's rhythm, the way conversation ebbs and flows, the way the light folds around the edges of the room, the way people lean just a little closer to one another here than they do in the market square. A woman in a deep red gown approaches. She is neither the youngest nor the oldest here. Her beauty is in her bearing. She sits without asking, her eyes steady on yours. "You've been traveling," she says, not a question. You nod, and she smiles faintly, as if she knows the kind of roads that end at doors like this. She tells you of the city of the fair, that will begin in a few days, of the guild masters, who will argue over whose stalls get the best positions of the foreign merchants, who will come with wagons heavy with goods and pockets heavier still. She says the house will be full on those nights, coins spilling faster than ale. But for now, things are quiet. Quiet is not bad. Quiet keeps tempers cool and debts clear. The abbess moves through the room, pausing here and there to speak softly to a woman, to refill a patron's cup, to collect a coin from a palm. She notices everything: the serving girl's uneven stack of plates, the bouncer's shift in stance near the door, the way two men at the far table have begun speaking too loudly for the hour. She's not a ruler here so much as the conductor of an orchestra, keeping every instrument in harmony. The woman in the red gown gestures toward the stairs, but you shake your head, content to remain in the warm glow of the common room. She doesn't press. Instead, she leans back, telling you a joke about a baker, a friar, and a spilled barrel of wine. You laugh more than the joke deserves, and she seems pleased. It's an exchange of something small but real: shared air, shared heat, shared humanity. Nearby, a group of sailors speak in a blend of languages, their voices rising and falling like waves. One hums a tune, and soon the others join in a shanty that could belong to any port from London to Lisbon. The sound wraps around the room, a soft net, pulling everyone a little closer together. The bouncer opens the door briefly to let someone in, a man with the look of a craftsman, his hands rough, his boots dusted white from lime or plaster. He nods to the abbess and makes his way to the bar. His arrival changes nothing and everything. Another thread woven into the night's tapestry. Hours pass in the way they always do here, measured not by the clock, but by the slow shift of bodies and the deepening shadows in the corners. The woman in red rises at last, touches your shoulder lightly, and disappears into the hum of the room. You watch her go, knowing you'll remember her as clearly as you remember the others: Kathy in the London stew, Marianne in Bruges. Els in her scarlet kirtle, Katerina by the plague-side hearth. The fire burns lower. The room thins. The abbess sits again at her post ledger in hand, her quill scratching softly across the page. Somewhere upstairs, a door closes with that same soft finality you've heard in every brothel you've visited. It's the sound of another night ending its turn on the wheel. You know you'll leave soon. The air outside will be cold, the streets damp and quiet, the city already halfway to tomorrow. But for now, you remain a little longer, letting the warmth and the low music of voices seep into you. This is the last house you'll enter on this journey, but it feels less like an ending than another point in an endless circle. Brothels change. Cities rise and fall. Wars come and go. Plagues burn through and fade. But here in the slow hours before dawn, the brothel's heartbeat remains steady, almost eternal. And you sitting by the fire feel that you have learned its rhythm at last. The fire you've been sitting beside fades now to the softest glow, its warmth a memory more than a touch. Around you, the last of the night's voices melt into the hush of an empty room. Somewhere above a single floorboard creaks, then stills. Even the air seems to rest. You step outside into streets washed clean by night, their cobbles cool beneath your feet. The city is in that fragile pause before the day stirs the hour, when the sky is pale but the sun not yet risen. You walk past shuttered shops and silent doorways, past the faint gleam of a puddle in an alley where a lantern once swung. Each brothel you've seen along the way drifts through your mind like lights on water. The smoky warmth of London stews, Bruges, with its bright wool gowns and merchant laughter. Cologne's cautious half-shadows. Florence's velvet-voiced salons. Venice's masked whispers, the plague-scarred refuge where every candle burned like a heartbeat. Each door you opened held its own small world. Each room breathed the same fragile mix of want, survival, and fleeting comfort. Now those doors close gently behind you. The streets open wider. The first bird sings from a hidden perch, a note that hangs, cool air. You find yourself slowing your thoughts, softening the shapes of the night's rooms, blurring into something dreamlike. In your mind's ear, the brothel's rhythm lingers, soft footsteps, a low laugh, the creak of wood under shifting weight. It fades slowly like a song that carries you across the threshold into sleep. And when the morning finally comes, you will rise knowing you have walked a long, winding road through the heart of a world few see clearly.